What if marriage weren't a promise of happiness, but a silent prison of the soul? Nietzsche saw in marriage not the celebration of love, but the consecration of mediocrity. He perceived behind the rings and vows a social mechanism that transforms men and women into predictable pieces, repeating inherited roles, extinguishing the creative flame that could ignite new ways of living. For him, love is lightning, a brief spark, but marriage attempts to imprison this lightning in an eternal cage. From this arise resentment, routine, and decay. Nietzsche didn't write to comfort, but to awaken. Ask yourself, what if the idea of happily ever after were just a lie told to domesticate your freedom? How many men lose themselves trying to sustain an illusion that soon dissolves under the weight of days? Here, we'll dive into Nietzsche's dark and liberating vision of marriage, love, and the power to live without chains. Not to repeat phrases, but to understand the danger hidden behind what we call commitment. If this reflection moves you, subscribe and follow this journey to the end. Nietzsche never let himself be deceived by the golden glow with which society wraps marriage. For him, this institution wasn't love's triumph, but the clearest expression of how collectivity manages to domesticate the individual. Marriage, as it was viewed in his time, and largely still is today, doesn't emerge from free and creative choice, but from a need to fit in, to not appear maladjusted. It's a pact with normalcy, a contract that guarantees not happiness, but obedience. When a man marries by convention, he surrenders his freedom to the yoke of common morality. Marriage transforms him into someone respectable, someone who fulfills the expected script: husband, worker, father, family head. But Nietzsche saw enormous danger in this, because authentic life for him doesn't flourish in mechanical repetition of social roles, but in the audacity to create new values. By marrying, man becomes predictable. His destiny is already written, a routine of duties, repetitions, small obligations that slowly suffocate his vital force. Nietzsche invites us to reflect. How many marriages result from genuine choice, and how many are merely consequences of fear of solitude or cultural pressure? The man who seeks to protect himself from existence's anguish through marriage is actually just accepting a prison with invisible bars. He trades freedom's risk for habit's security. He trades creative fire for the lukewarm stability of conjugal life. He saw marriage as part of a domestication system. Like religion, morality, and politics, marriage was a device to keep people in order, controlled, repeating the same patterns from generation to generation. By uniting through social contract, man renounces being master of himself. From then on, he no longer lives for himself, but to maintain the family machinery, respond to social expectations, and sustain a way of life he didn't genuinely choose. Nietzsche didn't deny that there could be beauty in a true union, but questioned the falseness of the universal promise. Not all men should marry, nor should marriage be seen as an obligatory goal. For the philosopher, the greatest error lies in transforming a social institution into inevitable destiny. He suspected that many married not for love, but because marriage functioned as armor against society's judging gaze. Being married means being accepted, appearing normal. But deep down, this normalcy costs dearly. It costs authentic life. It costs the possibility of reinventing oneself. Marriage's social prison is subtle because it doesn't present itself as prison. On the contrary, it presents itself as love, as responsibility, as maturation. But for Nietzsche, maturing isn't conforming, it's creating. And most men, when they marry, stop creating. Life becomes maintenance, sustenance, preservation. Marriage is thus a school of mediocrity. It teaches abandoning risk and always choosing the safe path. Imagine the artist who abandons his work because conjugal life demands time, stability, and predictability. Imagine the thinker who trades creative silence for the incessant voice of family obligations. It's in this sense that Nietzsche said, "Marriage imprisons." It steals energy that could be used in life's affirmation and channels it into repeating a common life. The creative man becomes domesticated man. This criticism shouldn't be confused with contempt for love. Nietzsche knew that love can be an immense transforming force, but believed that when imprisoned within a social contract, it degrades. What was living flame becomes ash. What was vital impulse becomes moral obligation, and the cruelest prison is the one we call home, because in it, man believes he's safe when actually he's chained. Therefore, when looking at marriage, Nietzsche saw less an act of love and more an act of surrender. One surrenders to society, surrenders to tradition, surrenders to the fear of being alone. And he who surrenders ceases to be a creator. Marriage's social prison for Nietzsche doesn't only destroy freedom, but also destroys the greatness that could be born from solitude's risk. Nietzsche had no illusions about romantic love. For him, love is a brief fire, a flame that burns with intensity but inevitably consumes itself. Human error lies in believing this flame can be transformed into something eternal, as if it were possible to crystallize the instant and keep it alive forever. It's precisely from here that marriage's tragedy is born, transforming an ephemeral state into a lifelong contract. When we fall in love, we feel intoxication. The other appears as a promise of completeness, as an answer to our lacks, as the being capable of liberating us from solitude. The heart races, the mind loses itself in reveries, and we believe we're before something sacred. Nietzsche, however, saw in this state more a trick of nature than a sign of transcendence. Love, he said, isn't spiritual purity, but biological and psychological necessity. It's life using masks to perpetuate itself, to lead us to the reproductive instinct, to drag us to a union that doesn't always spring from reason or freedom. The danger lies in confusing this momentary ecstasy with destiny. Marrying in passion's name is like building a house on quicksand. What seemed solid soon reveals itself unstable, because the beginning's intensity cannot be sustained by routine. The gaze that once enchanted becomes familiar. The gesture that once moved becomes repetition, and what seemed transcendent becomes banal. Nietzsche alerts us. Romantic love is passing, and wanting to make it eternal is a form of self-deception. He saw in traditional marriage the desperate attempt to imprison this flame, like someone holding lightning inside a cage. But lightning extinguishes, and what remains isn't light, but frustration's darkness. How many men find themselves years after marriage looking at their companion no longer as muse, but as duty partner? How many discover that love doesn't resist day's repetition? It's at this point that resentment, bitterness, silent or explicit betrayals emerge, and the weight of a life that lost its beginning's freshness. Nietzsche believed that, largely, love is illusion created to bear the unbearable. Solitude. Passion makes us forget for an instant that we are isolated mortal beings destined to finitude. In Encounter's ecstasy, we believe life has greater meaning. But when intoxication passes, crude lucidity remains. We don't find redemption in the other, only a momentary reflection of ourselves. And this disillusion can become unbearable for those who believed in the myth of happily ever after. Society itself reinforces this deception. Films, stories, and traditions narrate love as if it were eternal, as if marrying were the crowning of perfect destiny. For Nietzsche, this is nothing but emotional domestication, an artifice to keep men within the social machinery. Romantic love's illusion serves so we accept the conjugal contract, believing we're fulfilling an ideal, when actually we're just reproducing an inherited model. Nietzsche invites us to face love with courage. Instead of idealizing it, recognizing it as what it is, a strong but brief experience. Passion is beautiful because it's passing, and its beauty lies precisely in not lasting. By wanting to eternalize it, we transform it into farce. Marriage becomes then love's decay stage, the moment when flame extinguishes, but actors continue performing the play, pretending they still believe in what no longer exists. For him, only those capable of accepting transitoriness could live love without falling into resentment's trap, loving without desiring to eternalize, living the instant without wanting to transform it into contract. But this posture requires strength that few have. Most prefer believing in love's comfortable lie that it can be eternal, because truth is too hard. Everything alive is passing, including the most intense feelings. Nietzsche didn't condemn love itself, but the belief that it can be an eternal foundation. Love is a dance, a game, a flame, and like every flame, it needs to be accepted in its transitory nature. Marriage's great failure is wanting to transform instant into eternity, and in this attempt, both flame and freedom are destroyed. Thus, romantic love is passing illusion, not because it's false, but because it's too true in the instant it happens. It's life in pure state, but precisely for this reason, it cannot be frozen, and the man who believes he can trap it in a golden ring finds himself condemned to witness the spectacle of his own disillusion. Nietzsche challenges us: are we willing to love knowing that love will pass? Or do we prefer to delude ourselves, chaining fire until it dies, leaving only ashes of resentment? Few of Nietzsche's phrases were as misinterpreted as the famous, "Are you going to women? Do not forget the whip." Many read it literally, as if it were an appeal to violence. But actually, Nietzsche was pointing to something much deeper and more disturbing. Love between man and woman isn't a territory of harmony, but a field of forces, a power game where seduction, domination, and resistance intertwine. For Nietzsche, no human relationship is innocent. Every encounter is crossed by wills to power, by forces that seek to expand, conquer, impose themselves. Love, far from being an exception, is perhaps the most intense stage of this battle. Loving isn't simply uniting in sweetness, it's also disputing, testing limits, subjugating and being subjugated. The whip, symbol of power, shouldn't be read as literal instrument, but as metaphor. It's the warning that every loving relationship is crossed by tensions of domination and danger. In marriage, these forces become disguised under harmony's mask. The couple presents itself to society as if it were a balanced unity, but underground what exists is struggle, manipulation, strategic concessions. Who loves also desires to control. Who surrenders also tries to possess. Woman, by becoming wife, gains power while also losing. She becomes the home's center, the daily guardian, but in exchange must abdicate her own freedom. Man, by marrying, believes he assumes the chief's position, but soon discovers he's also trapped by his companion's expectations, affective demands, conjugal life's silent tribunal. Nietzsche saw in this battle something inevitable, because love isn't a state of peaceful fusion, but a field of delicate war. Loving is taking risks, and in this risk there are always wounds. Who enters a relationship believing in absolute purity is blind to human game's reality. Therefore, the phrase about the whip functions as warning. Don't delude yourself. There's no innocence in love. There's always struggle. Woman, for Nietzsche, wasn't just victim of this game, but also active agent. He saw her as astute, instinctive being, capable of using her weapons, seduction, mystery, apparent fragility to conquer power. Man, in turn, believing himself dominator, often becomes dominated by what he doesn't understand in the feminine. This cycle of seduction and resistance is part of relationship's very nature. It's not about blaming one or the other, but recognizing that love is a stage of forces, and that ignoring this is living in self-deception. Traditional marriage, by trying to transform this struggle into stability, generates resentment. Because instead of accepting the power game as part of life, it masks it with the ideal of eternal harmony. The result is that struggle continues happening, but underground, silent, corrosive. The husband who feels imprisoned, the wife who feels she's lost desire's freshness. Both believe they're fulfilling just roles, but deep down carry hidden grudges like wounds that cannot heal. Nietzsche saw in passion an honest game, because in it, power is clear. There's conquest, seduction, resistance, surrender. In marriage, this same game becomes hypocrisy because it's covered by moral obligation. Intensity is lost, but dispute continues, only disguised in small charges, effective blackmail, heavy silences. Loving in this context ceases to be creation and becomes negotiation. It's important to understand that for Nietzsche, love isn't condemned for being struggle. On the contrary, it's valuable precisely for this, because it's risk, because it's battle of forces, because it forces us to face otherness in all its power. The problem isn't struggle. The problem is disguise, believing in purity's illusion when actually what exists is power. Marriage fails because it tries to deny this essence. When Nietzsche writes about the whip, he's reminding that there's no innocence in encounter between man and woman. It's a warning of lucidity. He who enters love must be prepared to face not only sweetness, but also danger. And it's precisely this danger that makes love fascinating. The problem is trying to transform it into safe territory, because by removing risk, the very intensity that sustains it is killed. Thus, the power game isn't love's flaw, but its very nature. And marriage, by trying to imprison love in a stable frame, doesn't eliminate power, only makes it more corrosive. The relationship that could be creation becomes routine. Open war becomes cold war. And in home walls' silence, men and women continue disputing, but now without desire's brilliance, only with obligation's weight. Nietzsche provokes us. Are we ready to accept that love is struggle? Or do we prefer to live in the comfortable lie that eternal harmony exists between man and woman? The answer to this question defines not only our relationships, but the way we face life itself. Nietzsche never tired of pointing out mediocrity's danger. For him, nothing was more harmful to creative life than comfortable habit, predictable path, safe choice. Marriage, in the way society molded it, is precisely this: an invitation to mediocre life, an escape from greatness to take refuge in routine. The man who marries believing he's found stability soon discovers this stability charges a very high price. Initial passion dissolves, and what remains is days' repetition. Same conversations, same obligations, same small concessions. Gradually, conjugal life transforms into machinery that always turns at the same rhythm, and the individual begins living not in his own name, but in function of maintaining this machine. Nietzsche saw in this movement a betrayal of existence itself. Man is born with the possibility to create, to overcome himself, to risk himself in unknown territories. But by accepting conjugal life as destiny, he renounces this force. Instead of affirming life, he reduces it to conservation. Marriage thus is repetition's school, where one learns to abdicate risk in exchange for security. It's necessary to understand that, for Nietzsche, mediocrity isn't just a social condition, but a state of spirit. The mediocre man is one who prefers not to confront freedom's abyss. He seeks refuge in conventions, traditions, predetermined roles. Marriage in this context is the greatest symbol of this surrender. The husband transforms into maintainer, the wife into home guardian, and together they begin reproducing the same cycle of previous generations. Where there could be creation, only repetition exists. Imagine the artist who dreams of writing, but finds no time between work and family obligations. Imagine the thinker who loses his hours of creative silence to attend to conjugal life's demands. Imagine the common man who, instead of risking himself in new paths, contents himself with domestic routine's comfort. This is how mediocrity installs itself, not explosively, but subtly, devouring little by little the inner flame. Nietzsche believed many men marry not for love, but for fear. Fear of solitude, fear of judgment, fear of instability. And where there's fear, there's no greatness. Marriage, then, appears as easy solution. It provides identity, status, social recognition. But all this has a price, and the price is loss of self. Man stops living to create and begins living to sustain. He becomes another link in the chain, another repeater of stories already told. Marriage as mediocrity is also the place where great dreams die. Not because it's impossible to love, but because love, within conjugal logic, transforms into obligation. Loving by duty isn't loving. It's just maintaining appearances. Romance that once seemed transcendental becomes coexistence routine. I love you, said with enthusiasm, becomes automatic formula, and eternal vows transform into memories of distant time. Nietzsche saw in this not only personal danger, but cultural. Societies that idealize marriage as inevitable destiny are actually cultivating generations of domesticated men and women. And culture that domesticates kills the possibility of new values, new ways of living. Conjugal mediocrity, thus, isn't just individual problem, but obstacle to more creative humanity's flourishing. The great irony is that many believe marriage will make them better, more mature, more complete. Nietzsche would respond that the opposite is true. Most become smaller, more predictable, more limited. Marriage doesn't expand horizons, but narrows paths. The man who could face mountains contents himself walking in circles inside his own house's garden. And here arises the hardest provocation. How many marriages really expand both partners' lives? How many don't reduce themselves over years to mere lukewarm coexistences, sustained by convenience or fear of rupture? Conjugal mediocrity is silent, but devastating. It steals not all at once, but drop by drop, until one day man awakens and realizes his life passed without him having actually lived. Nietzsche challenges us not to fall into this deception. Love can be flame, but marriage, when seen as destiny, transforms this flame into ashes. Living is risking, creating, launching oneself into the unknown. Who surrenders to conjugal mediocrity abdicates all this and chooses repetition as way of existing. And nothing, for Nietzsche, is more tragic than this surrender disguised as maturity. Few themes were as controversial in Nietzsche's philosophy as his vision of woman. Many accused him of misogyny. Others defended that his phrases were literary provocations, masks to reveal uncomfortable truths about relations between sexes. What's certain is that, when speaking of woman, Nietzsche never referred only to her as individual, but as symbol reflection of broader forces, mirror in which man sees himself and loses himself. In marriage, woman was reduced to wife and mother's role. Society molded her as morality's guardian, tradition's maintainer, domestic life's sustenance. Nietzsche viewed this process with bitter irony. By imprisoning woman in this model, society believed it was protecting her, but actually was making her accomplice of mediocrity. Man, by marrying, doesn't find a creative partner, but a domesticated figure, trained to repeat values. Thus he also imprisons himself. Woman's prison is, at the same time, man's prison. Nietzsche saw woman as being of astuteness and instinct, capable of playing with power subtly, seduction, mystery, ability to awaken desire. All this was understood by him as expressions of proper will to power. Man often believed he dominated woman, but ended up dominated by fascination she exercised. In this game, there was no innocence. Every gesture, every word, every silence could be weapon. Loving relationship, then, was stage of invisible strategies, where both sought advantage, even if unconsciously. Therefore, Nietzsche said woman shouldn't be seen as weakness, but as mirror. Man, before her, sees reflected his own illusions, his own fears, his own vanity. He projects upon her the image of salvation, completeness, love's eternity. But in doing so, he forgets woman is also will to power, being in movement, not fixed idle. Traditional marriage's error lies in transforming woman into statue, faithful wife, devoted mother, when actually she is flow, enigma, transformation. Nietzsche suspected that men, by idealizing woman, were actually idealizing their own cowardice. The myth of holy, pure, dedicated woman isn't homage, but excuse. Man, by elevating her to this pedestal, finds reason to surrender to conjugal life's comfort, without needing to face freedom's abyss. In this sense, woman in marriage isn't just victim, but also instrument. She confirms man in his mediocrity. But Nietzsche didn't accept this passive image. He saw in woman a vital force, energy that, when not imprisoned by social morality, could be devastating. Woman free is creative power, instinctive force that destabilizes, challenges, demands from man much more than convenience. And that's why the philosopher so often portrayed her as danger. Because, for man who seeks only security, free woman is mortal threat. She doesn't content herself repeating roles. She exposes his fragility, strips his illusions, forces him to confront himself. Marriage, therefore, is also woman's domestication mechanism. It not only traps man in mediocrity, but neutralizes feminine power, transforming her into shadow of herself. Wife becomes reflection of others' expectations, not expression of her own will. That's why Nietzsche saw conjugal love as something that, deep down, weakens both. Man loses his freedom, and woman loses her vitality. However, Nietzsche didn't deny that something grandiose could exist between man and woman. Authentic encounter wouldn't be that sustained by social contract, but by vital force of two beings who, instead of imprisoning themselves, propel each other. Love that doesn't demand fixed roles, but recognizes struggle, risk, impermanence. In this encounter, woman would stop being mirror of masculine cowardice and become creation partner. But for this, it would be necessary that both abandon inherited illusions. Illusion of woman as saint, illusion of man as chief, illusion of marriage as safe harbor. Nietzsche saw woman deep down as test for man. Before her, he reveals himself, either chooses home's comfortable lie or faces life's dangerous truth. What woman mirrors in him isn't just his desire, but also his weakness. And only he who bears seeing himself naked before this mirror can really love without losing himself. Thus, the problem isn't woman, but society's use of her. Marriage transforms what could be force into repetition, transforms energy into duty, transforms encounter into prison. Nietzsche alerts us, who seeks in woman only confirmation of his own mediocrity will end up imprisoned, but who dares see her as power will have to face greater risk, the risk of transforming alongside her. Nietzsche wasn't just destroyer of illusions. Although he was implacable in his criticism of marriage, romantic love, and conjugal mediocrity, he also pointed to alternative paths. His philosophy doesn't limit itself to saying no. It invites to deeper yes, yes to life, freedom, creation. For Nietzsche, true challenge wasn't fleeing marriage by cowardice or resentment, but creating ways of living that were worthy of will to power. Man who marries for fear of solitude reveals his weakness. But he who faces solitude as field of creation, he approaches greatness. Nietzsche valued individual capable of bearing himself, of facing emptiness without seeking refuge in contracts or conventions. Being alone, for most, is unbearable. But for creator, solitude is workshop. In it thoughts are forged, in it experiments are risked, in it form is given to what doesn't yet exist. Man who can't bear being alone isn't ready for love, because he'll end up using other as shield against his own emptiness. Alternative to marriage, therefore, isn't total rejection of love, but refusal to transform it into prison. Loving, for Nietzsche, can be grandiose experience as long as it's not confused with property, contract, or duty. Truly loving is accepting risk, instability, transitoriness. It's being with other, not because society demands, but because both propel themselves to create, grow, affirm life. Nietzsche believed great love is only possible between strong spirits, capable of facing impermanence without resentment. Weak demands promises of eternity. Strong accepts instant and lives it in maximum intensity. Traditional marriage is invention of weak, those who can't bear risk and therefore need forever illusion. But Creator knows nothing is eternal, and therefore values present without needing to imprison it. This vision also implies reinterpretation of woman. If in marriage she was reduced to mirror of mediocrity, in creative encounter she becomes affirmation partner. Not wife, not property, but vital force that destabilizes, challenges, awakens. In this sense, Nietzsche anticipated radical vision. True union isn't between two domesticated beings, but between two beings who dare affirm their power. Relationship not of dependence, but of shared risk. Love that Nietzsche admits isn't one that consoles, but disturbs. It doesn't soften life, but intensifies it. It doesn't eliminate danger, but embraces it. Only this love can be called creative, because it doesn't seek repetition's security, but transformation's abyss. Who enters such relationship must be willing to lose himself, change, be constantly reborn. And this is something traditional marriage, with its fixed formulas, can never offer. Thus, Nietzschean alternative to marriage isn't celibacy, nor cowardly flight from love, but courage to love without imprisoning oneself. It's living encounters as combustion, as sparks that light new possibilities without pretension of making them eternal. It's accepting transitoriness not as weakness, but as condition of intensity. Man who understands this doesn't fear solitude or company, because in both he finds strength to create. Nietzsche proposes ultimately that we stop thinking love in terms of property. Marriage is maximum form of this illusion, believing other is ours, that their desire belongs to us, that their life is tied to ours. But true love doesn't possess, it liberates. It doesn't bind other to contract, but invites them to dance in creation's space. This is Nietzschean life's promise, not living imprisoned to conventions, but daring to create own paths. Marriage as institution may even offer comfort, but creation demands risk, and Nietzsche never hesitated choosing risk. He preferred dangerous life to safe life, creative solitude to mediocre company, intense instant to eternal without brilliance. Therefore, true alternative to marriage is becoming creator. It's making one's own life a work, instead of repeating it as farce. It's loving without illusion of eternity, loving knowing everything passes, but that precisely for this reason each moment can be lived with maximum force. Who understands this, stops needing forever, and begins living now as eternity. Nietzsche provokes us. Are we willing to renounce contract's mediocrity to live creation's risk? Or do we prefer security of life repeated each generation? Answer isn't in marriage or love, but in courage to choose between comfort and greatness. We reach the end of this journey through Nietzsche's criticism of marriage. We saw how he viewed this institution not as love's celebration, but as social prison, disguised mediocrity, security packed against solitude. For Nietzsche, love is flame, game of forces, danger. But when imprisoned by contract, it loses vitality and transforms into routine, resentment, and repetition. Marriage thus steals man's greatness and neutralizes woman's power, imprisoning both in inherited roles. Nietzschean alternative isn't renouncing love, but daring to live it without chains, without illusions of eternity. It's transforming solitude into workshop, encounter into creation, life into work. Only strong bear this risk, but only they can truly love. And you? What belief about love and marriage has most imprisoned you until today? Comment here from where you're watching us, share your vision, like this video, and subscribe to channel. Together, we form community that seeks not comfort, but lucidity, not mediocrity, but power. Thank you for walking with us this far. Philosophy is more alive when shared.